Our study is out of Revelation chapter 13. We started it last week, uh, learned a few things. This week we learn concerning the sea beast itself. So we have a beast coming out of the sea. I saw a beast coming out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns 10 diadems, and upon his heads names of blasphemy. So here is the beast as an artist has envisioned what he sees. The text continues on in verse 2 and points out that he has the paws of a bear. He has the look of a leopard, and thus you see the spots on the beast, and the face and the mouth of a lion. So you have the 7 heads, you have the 10 horns, the 10 diadems, and this particular beast. Now, we call to mind the fact that whenever we see these beasts, we recognize that they are symbolic. I will emphasize the point that there is no such beast. You will never, ever see this beast in nature, out of the world. It is a symbolic phraseology, description that is describing something else. That's the point of John doing what he did. And you will see in a moment that the leopard, the bear, and the lion really comes from Daniel and the 4 kingdoms that he's talking about. We continue on and we take notice that he would come out of the sea, but the dragon gave him power and his throne and great authority. What is trying to be depicted with this particular slide is that the power behind the throne in Rome, and that's what he's talking about, is the serpent out of chapter 12. We've already looked at the serpent in chapter 12. We've already heard that he is the power behind the various instruments, agents that are being used on the earth in order to fight the church, in order to cause great problems on the earth. Again, let me emphasize that the serpent is not a dragon. We have struck that out so that we can understand that the word that is being used is simply transliterated. It is taking the Greek letters and bringing them over into the English language. So it's not a medieval dragon that we see with its fire breathing, flying in the air with legs that are hopping around, but instead it is an enormous serpent. We studied that in chapter 12. But the power behind the beast coming out of the sea would be evil, would be Satan. That's what we found out. We also took notice, I saw one of his heads as though it had been smitten unto death. The artist here is trying to depict a dagger, a Roman sword going through the head, the neck, the area. The neck is considered a part of the head concerning this particular beast. Now, let me bring in another passage found in verse 10 of the same chapter. In the middle, it says, "He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword." The sword that is being discussed in this passage is the dagger that was used with Nero whenever he tried to commit suicide. We have Suetonius, who would be a first, second century historian. He would repeat that then, with the help of his servant, Epaphroditus, his private secretary, Nero plunged a dagger into his throat. He's trying to kill himself. He realizes that he's not as welcomed as he had been in the past. Now, Suetonius, I must tell you very quickly, writes in Latin language, whereas the Bible is in Greek. I would also tell you a little inside nuance is that John is using the Hebrew concepts. in using the Greek. That throws off a number of commentators when they try to put grammar together and syntax together. It just gives them fits. Be that as it may, we have historians that would let us know that Nero would try to kill himself. Well, he is that head that had received a blow. But it continues on in verse 3. And his death stroke was healed, and the whole earth wondered after the beast. So they're trying to figure it out. We have and I'm going to say the Emperor Nero, the sixth emperor of Rome. He is the head that is being discussed that would receive a death blow. But now he's healed. In what way? Well, here we have Tacitus, who is the historian, and he would give us this information. Various rumors were current about the death of Nero, so that there were many who pretended and believed that he was still alive. There are others who would give us the same thing. Relevance, to revive again, would be Nero to revive again, was a legend in that time and in that day. They believed that Nero, though he was dead, he arose from the dead. And they had no evidence. There was no kind of evidence. It's just that things were going on that would leave them the impression that this Nero had come alive. So we see that a number of things that would be true in the sense in which John is giving it. And what sense is John using? One of these days we'll be in chapter 17. And we're going to read how this head dies, comes alive, and is the eighth. Wouldn't you like to know what that is? Yes, but not now. And so we have a death stroke that has been healed. Thus, it is the fact that Nero's persecution of everybody ceases and then comes alive again. That is basically what is meant by what is going on. We then turn our attention to verse 4. And they worshiped the dragon, the serpent, because he gave his authority unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, who is likened unto the beast, who is able to war with him. The point that is being driven home here is by the support of Satan, who loves the worship of human beings, is now trying to get everybody to worship the beast. Well, whenever you look at the historians, we have the king of Armenia in 66 AD. This is just a few years before Nero dies. The suicide with the sword. And you have the king of Armenia, as he is visiting with Nero, and he's scared to death of what's going on around him. He says, Master, I have come to thee, my God, to worship thee as I do Mithras. The destiny thou hast spentest for me shall be mine, for thou art my fortune and my fate. So he's saying, you are God. I am worshiping you. I am bowing down to you. And you can see the artist's depiction of the man bowing at his feet and giving him worship and obeisance just as he would a God. We could multiply this God image over and over again. I'm going to give one more. We have it as Nero in about 68 AD, a year and a half, 2 years later, and that's shortly before he dies. And we have him going through the city of Rome, and the Romans are hailing him, and they would say, Augustus, Augustus, O divine voice, blessed are they that hear thee. Thus he is receiving the adulation of the multitudes as God. And I must say that it's what he wants. He's begging for it. He's pleading for it. He's demanding it. He's commanding it. And thus the people, recognizing that, would give him the very adulation of a God that he is trying to garner. We then take notice in verse 4, at the last phrase, still describing the sea beast, who is able to war with him. since I am correct in understanding that this is Rome with Nero as the one who is leading at the time in which John would write, do what? I need to make sure that before we go any further, that we are talking somewhere around 66, 67 AD. Nero is ruling. Not 96, not 94, not when Domitian was the ruler over Rome, but instead Nero. That's because it is our judgment, as we put forth. The book of Revelation was written concerning the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. That being the case, then what we're seeing with all of our figures of speech is that fall in one way or another. And a part of that fall would be, how did it fall? Who brought about that fall? Well, Nero. And so you hear the text saying, he's a mighty, mighty warrior. He's a mighty person. He's a mighty commander. He's a mighty ruler. Who is able to war against him? According to what John is writing. Well, when you turn to Josephus, a Jewish fellow who's writing history for the Romans, we hear him write, hath not your armies been often beaten, as he writes to the Jews, even by your neighboring nations, while the power of the Romans is invincible in all parts of the inhabited earth? What he just said was the same thing that John wrote. A number of times you get the idea that Josephus may be reading the New Testament at times, because he will say things that will go right down the alley of what Jesus said, what Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John would write, the book of Revelation. And so you kind of wonder. By the way, Josephus recognized in two different passages that Jesus lived in that day and time in which it is so depicted, and that he was before Pilate, the governor who would condemn him to death. We go further and we take notice in verse 5. There was given to him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and there was given him authority to continue 42 months. We have seen this 42 months, and we use this particular chart, which is also the 1,260 days. I am simply emphasizing what we've already studied out of chapter 12 in a greater detail, and that is you have the beginning of Nero's persecution against Christians, and you have the end of it whenever he died. What he did, he burned down the city of Rome. Rome burned while he was fiddling with his fiddle. They got mad at it. The people got mad at him. He wanted a new Rome, new Roman city. And so in order to divert and reflect, he would say that the Christians were the ones who burnt down the city. Well, everybody got mad. He simply started persecuting them. And that lasted somewhere around 42 months, 1,260 days, according to the beginning of the persecution and his death, which stopped the persecution. We go a little bit further and we take notice in verse 7. It was given unto him, that is the sea beast, to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And there was given to him authority over every tribe, people, tongue, and nation. That's a world ruler. Whenever you study the book of Daniel with David, you've already come across this, which we'll look a little deeper at it. You've already come across this in Daniel 7 of this great fourth world ruler that Daniel would predict around 600 AD. We continue and we take notice that he made war with the saints to overcome them. And then in verse 1, we go back and we see upon his heads names of blasphemy. There was given unto him a mouth speaking blasphemies. He blasphemed God. He blasphemed the tabernacle. He blasphemed those who were in. And you can see by this artist's depiction, you have blasphemies that are coming out of the mouth of the heads. You have blasphemies that are coming over the top of the heads. They are thinking against God. They are acting against God. They are persecuting against God. They are fighting against God and all that is divine. We emphasize the idea that he would war with the saints. Here's what you have with the various beasts that have come out of the sea, putting it all together because we're still talking about the same beast. You have predictions concerning the sea beast or a world power. It starts with Daniel in Daniel chapter 7 and in Daniel chapter 2, but Daniel chapter 7 has the four beasts. The one beast, diverse from all of the other, more fierce and terrifying than the others. So he would foretell of the beast rise. We would see John in Revelation 13, he would foretell the beast war with the saints. But not only the saints, but he also would foretell the beast destruction of Babylon. Revelation chapter 17. John furthermore would foretell the beast being subdued, muted. I would say destroyed, but that's not what he's talking about in Revelation 19. To say what I just said, again, Daniel 7, Daniel foretells. Revelation 13, John foretells. Revelation 17, John foretells of the beast destroying Jerusalem. Revelation 19, John foretells the beast being subdued and cast into the fire. Going back to what Daniel had to say in Daniel 7, 4, and 5, he would depict the first beast as being a lion with wings. The second, and by the way, that was Nebuchadnezzar, who was the Babylonian king, 600 BC. Then you had the bear, and that would be the Medo-Persians. Thirdly, you had the leopard with the wings, and that would be Alexander the Great because of his speed. Let me cover that right quick before we go to this ugly one. So you read in Revelation 13 a leopard, and Daniel would talk about his speed. We read in Daniel of a bear, and that would talk about his crushing capability. And then we would see Daniel talk about the lion, and that would be his fierceness. That's all wrapped up in the sea beast. The sea beast is made up of all of these. We see that also in Daniel chapter 2. Man, we've covered a lot of stuff without looking at the verses. Now I want you to take notice of this fourth beast. He is one ugly guy. I don't have any idea who has imagined that guy, but that's not what I imagine when I hear a beast when you're talking about the book of Revelation. Here's what I see with the artist's imagination of this beast, this fourth beast. It is Rome, by the way. It is diverse. It is terrifying. It is ferocious. This fourth beast that Daniel talks about, which is the beast of Revelation 13. What I see is the modern day Steven Spielberg, who has come up with some sort of predator out of space, a alien that will destroy. Well, that is not Daniel's concept. That is not the concept out of Revelation either. It is beasts that you know, terrifying as they may be, crushing as they may be, horrifying as they may be. They are not predators from outer space. We take notice in Revelation 13:1 that he saw the beast coming out of the sea. This is that same beast that you just saw that looked like this predator from outer space. This is Revelation 13. The sea beast is the beast, the fourth beast of Daniel chapter 7. We take notice in Revelation chapter 17 that the scarlet covered beast is also the sea beast. Wait a minute. Wait a minute, Ron. Are you sure? As sure as anybody studies it. It's not talking about a beast. Yeah, I see the word beast. There is no such beast. The characteristics of the beast is what is being emphasized by John. And John is talking about the support of the harlot. I will quickly tell you out of Revelation 17 and 18, the harlot of that text is Israel. It's the nation of Israel. It's Jerusalem. It's the destruction of God's nation that he set up that has become the fornicator with all the nations around about. That's what's meant by the harlot. We go one more and we see that the beast, that same beast that we started with in Revelation 13, that John predicted in Daniel 7, the fourth empire, the fourth ruling world, ruling power, that he is with the false prophet is cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. In Revelation chapter 19, it is my judgment that the fire, burning fire, the brimstone, is not talking about the Gehenna, the eternal abode of the lost. The writer is using a figure of speech in that particular text. Don't mix things up. In that particular text, he's emphasizing that there is a removal of the afflicting power. The afflicting power would be the sea beast and the false prophet. We shall see exactly who that false prophet is when we get to the last part of Revelation chapter 13. But here it is to be emphasized that there is a demise, and I've used the word a subduing, a muting of his power. And it is the figure of the lake that burneth with fire and brimstone. Daniel 7, Revelation 13, Revelation 17, Revelation 19, the world power called Rome that would fight against the church, war against the church, afflict the church, and also war against the harlot and destroy her. Could be the end of things. So we have these figures of speech that would help us to understand what is going on in my study judgment as to what's going on in the context of Revelation chapter 13. Skip down with me to let's look at verse 9 and 10. If any man hath an ear, let him hear. John is saying, pay close attention, isn't he? We've heard that before in Revelation chapter 2 and chapter 3, that whenever John would get to a particular point and make a particular point, he would call attention, the Spirit has spoken. Let him that heareth hear what the Spirit had to say. And then in verse 10, if any man is for captivity, unto captivity he goeth. If any man shall kill with a sword must he be killed. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. What we have is a trust in God. Whenever you read the figures of speech in the book of Revelation, you need something to rely upon. You need something to trust. What you need to trust is God with what he has to say, because there's some terrible things that are going to happen and has happened. They have happened in the book at the time in which Revelation was written in the first century. They would continue being repeated in other places philosophically in life, because you still have those same enemies. They just have different faces. Now we stop and make sure we understand this point as well. Satan does not enter into the mind of Nero and make Nero a bad man. Satan never changes the morals or the ethics or the spirituality of any man by getting inside of him and giving him things nobody else has, or giving him things everybody else has. It doesn't matter. Satan does not do that. We must not garner that thought from Revelation 12 and 13. We simply recognize that this beast is evil. He came out of the sea, and we studied last week the sea, and the sea would be an indication of turmoil. That's what a sea that is in the midst of a storm puts forth. They are in the midst of a societal storm in the first century. And this beast would come out of that and wreak havoc upon anybody that gets in his way. I guess we can stop right there and see if you have any questions as to all that we've tried to cover. And we'll stop right there. Now you've got 45 minutes to be able to ask something. I've got a question here from a young lady that's visiting with us this morning.
Back to the first line that you had, there was something on the horns that I didn't know what it was.
Okay.
Next slide. 10 diadems. Other diadems.
The question is asked, go back to, and y'all saw it fade out, go back to the first slide, basically the first area, and what popped up, what was that? And the question went further and said, is it diadems, and what are diadems? Well, as you can see from the slide, well, maybe you can't, but as you can see from the slide, what you have would be crowns. Crowns. Now, there are two kinds of crowns in the first century that Revelation basically discusses. You have the Stephanos, which would be the crown of victory. You would give the crown or the wreath crown unto the Olympic fella who's won the race or whatever they've won. And you put it on his head, and you do it still with the Olympics. You'll see it in the Olympics. They will give them a crown, a wreath. Well, that's the Stephanos, and it means victory. On the other hand, you have the diadem. The diadem is a crown of rule. It's interesting to note that one writer says that you never put a diadem on a Roman ruler. I found that quite interesting myself. You never put a diadem, a Greek word for diadem, on a Greek ruler. They use a little bit of different words because here's the point. With a diadem, you're emphasizing what goes on among the world of outside of Rome, outside of the Latin Rome area. So the diadem is simply pointing out rule. I will tell you now, since you're asking about it, in my judgment, the 10 diadems is not emperors of Rome. The horns are not 10 emperors of Rome. Look at the heads. The heads are the emperors. Why do you have 7 heads? There are 12 Caesars. Suetonius, we just saw his book that said the 12 Caesars of Rome. So why aren't there 12 heads? As I see it, I find it quite interesting that when John wrote, you had the use of 7 heads before the fall of Jerusalem. No, Ron, there were 10. Yes, I realize that. 3 of them were out of whack. And so what you have is Nero, it's focusing in on Nero. The beast is focusing in on Nero. And you have 7 heads, and the 6th one, Revelation 17, receives a death blow, dies. And then there's another that he revives, and it's the eighth. Figure that one out. We will when we get to Revelation 17. Well, that's the heads. The heads, and there's 7 of them, they depict Rome and the rulers of Rome. The horns depict kings that are ruled by the royal city. We will see that in Revelation chapter 17. Here's what we found out. Revelation 13 is talking about Nero. Revelation 13 is talking about Rome. Revelation 13 is talking about the devastation that the Roman rule would bring, not only against Christians, but also against others, but mainly against Christians. We went on to find out from other verses that Rome shall see such devastation. What you just heard out of the first century was a prediction that came true in their lifetime. That would produce faith in a person's mind. What occurs today is that you have people who take it out of the first century and they're saying these things are going to happen. What good did that do the Christians in the first century? None. What good does it do those in the first century to realize that their ruler, depicted as a sea beast, though he doesn't know who's saying it and what's being talked about concerning him, he's depicted as a sea beast that's going to receive a death blow, that he makes war with the saints, that he is going to defeat, Revelation 17, the people of God, the former people of God in Jerusalem. It would help Christians in the first century to gain great trust, verse 10, in what God has said. What good does it do us? We get the same trust when we understand the figures of speech properly. If we misunderstand the figures of speech and we push it into the future, we get no trust out of that. We get no trust out of that. But if we recognize that it's something that occurred in the first century with highly figurative language, then everybody following after the first century when it was written, who is a child of God and understands the figures of speech, gains great, great faith and trust in God, no matter what is happening around them. And there are a lot of things that are happening around us today that philosophically are showing Revelation to be accurate in its prediction. What? Are you saying today that the book of Revelation is talking about today? No, I'm not. I'm saying that the principles that are established by the figures of speech in the book of Revelation philosophically will be repeated over and over and over again. You're going to have governments that are going to be against the church. You're going to have a false religion that's going to be against the church. That would be the land beast, the earth beast, pardon me. And you're going to have the harlot who is against the church and will turn against her. There will be apostates who will turn against her. Revelation chapter 20 with Gog and Magog, which would be all the nations gathering against the holy city, the saints of God, throughout time. Thus, one little area in Revelation talks about the totality of the future with Gog and Magog and the fulfillment of that figure.